Hi everyone, it's been a while since I made a video and I think this one is topical. So, unlike a lot of my videos, I'm not going to be reading out from a particular news article or news report. I'm just going to speak fluidly. I'm just going to speak candidly about how I feel about this because it's attracted a lot of debate and a lot of coverage, arguably disproportional coverage, but there you have it. I'm talking about the controversy around Kneecap, the three band members. I'm not sure what the correct word is when you have three in a band, not a duo, not a quartet. But anyway, there's three of them, and they're in a rap group called Kneecap from Northern Ireland. I'm not sure if they're from Belfast or somewhere else, but um, they very much identify as Irish nationalists, which is fine. That's a viewpoint many people have. But I just want to prefix this video by observing that we live in an era where people talk about a lot about rights, but not as much about responsibilities. And I think that's very relevant to this controversy because if you heard a little cling there, a little beep thing, little uh, noise, that was just an advertisement popping up. Yeah, so we live in an era where people talk a lot about rights, but not so much about responsibilities. Now, the reason I mention that is predictably, there's two things going on. First of all, with some of their comments that have been revealed at a previous concert, a lot of their gigs have been cancelled in mainland Britain. I think there's many at this point have went ahead and cancelled it for ostensibly security reasons, among other reasons being given. And predictably, there's a chorus of um, cries from their supporters about freedom of speech. But I think that people need to understand that advocating violence has never been a valid part of free speech. I suppose if you want to take the absolutist argument that people could say absolutely anything they want, then yeah, it's a speech. It's therefore part of it. But to me, that is an absolutist and extreme argument to literally say people could say whatever they want. And I don't really buy this argument about dressing it up as art. Incitement to violence is incitement to violence, whether it's in a speech, a song, or otherwise. Now, very clearly, a few years ago, they did make blatant calls to kill Conservative MPs. That's the reality. And we know that's true because they've apologized for it. If they never said it, if it was taken out of context or it was made up, then why would they apologize? Now, I don't really believe that it's a sincere apology. I don't know, maybe it is. I'm more inclined to believe that they're only sorry they got exposed because they're getting more famous and therefore they're getting more exposure. But bear in mind, we've had two members of parliament murdered in this country in recent years, David Amos in 2021 and Joe Cox in 2016. Now, their supporters say, all this controversy over some words when they're talking about a genocide. They've been very vocal, apparently, on the Palestinian issue. Well, this is how I would respond to that. I have no problem, I have no issue with Kneecap or any other group taking issue with what's going on in the Holy Land. I do think it's appalling at this point. I've been very clear, I'm very critical of what Israel's doing. I do think it is, at the very least, collective punishment. So I don't criticize anyone for criticizing Israel or for being sympathetic to the Palestinians. It might be in the interest of Kneecap to actually educate themselves on this. They would discover that there are British parliamentarians who are critical of Israel and who are critical of what's going on there. It's not good enough to say, oh, we were only talking about Tories, or, to try and advocating violence, for an extremist who may take that up makes no difference. I just think that that is an abuse of free speech. And it does bug me a little bit that people just think, oh, it's fine, it's just words. Well, not really. When you incite violence, that has real world consequences. And we know this from history. We know that rabble rousers have incited violence. As far as I'm concerned, what these guys do is thrive on sectarianism. and some pretty toxic symbolism to make their fame and wealth. They have been pretty successful. They've got a lot of traction in recent years. A lot of their rapping is done in Irish, but there is clearly some pretty negative symbolism going on there. Look at the name, Kneecap. I mean, to me, that says a lot about their ethos. If you know anything about the Troubles, or indeed contemporary Northern Ireland, kneecapping was the preferred method of the paramilitaries to punish alleged informers. It was a particularly thuggish form of violence. So, what sort of band would actually name themselves after that, as if it's something to glorify? One of them, wears that trademark Irish flag balaclava, but, clearly intended to look like a terrorist. Apparently, they've just come out and said they're willing to meet Sir David Amos's daughter, supposedly as an olive branch. But again, I'm skeptical of their apology. I don't know that for sure. Maybe they are genuinely sorry. They've also recently come out and claimed that they've never supported Hamas or Hezbollah. Well, I don't know about that. I just don't know because I haven't seen the supposed times that they did, so I can't say either way. It wouldn't surprise me if they have, given their track record. And again, this is something that people need to differentiate. You can support the Palestinians, you can criticize Israel, but to me, as soon as you start defending the likes of Hamas or Hezbollah, that's crossing a line because they are organizations, whatever you think about the wider cause, they are organizations that deliberately target civilians. And that's not to exonerate Israel, but it's just a reality. What Hamas does helps no one. They've now got on the defensive and claimed they've never supported Hamas or Hezbollah and they're against the killing of civilians in general. Whether that's accurate or not, whether that is their position or whether they're just saying that because they've been exposed, I don't know. But again, people who say, "Oh, but all these lads are doing is calling out the injustice towards the Palestinians." Well, again, I put it to their supporters. There are lots of decent people who care about the Palestinians who do not represent what Nikab, in my opinion, represents. They represent sectarianism. I mean, they want to perform in a country that they ostensibly hate, the United Kingdom. They're Irish nationalists, they're militant Irish nationalists. So this isn't just an opinion. We believe there should be a united Ireland. They are showing symbolism. They're showing a sectarian message that is just, in my view, toxic. Now, I've heard that they've tried to reach out across the sectarian divide, but it's countered by the whole imagery that they have. You can't on one hand say we don't hate Protestants, we don't hate Unionists, whilst showing the sort of imagery that they show. They literally name themselves after a paramilitary punishment, and they dress. One of them literally dresses up like a terrorist. Now, what sort of message is that sort meant to send out? I'm sick of this lazy argument. It's just art. When you're in a position of influence, and these guys are getting to a point of quite a bit of success. They're making their wealth and their fame out of what they symbolize. So, yeah, they do have responsibility. I'm sick and tired of this argument that artists have no responsibility. Um, People are influenced by that. And, only last week there was a young lad in Derry, he was Catholic, and he was left for dead by a gang of loyalist thugs. He was autistic, he was vulnerable. It's appalling to still see that in Northern Ireland. There was another incident where there was some guys marching again, a loyalist marching band, and they were gloating on the very day that the Pope died. And on the national side, you have the likes of Kneecap, promoting the sort of imagery and anti-British sentiments that they do. So, in my view, they're part of the problem. They're not part of the solution. I don't miss that pettiness in Northern Ireland. I don't miss the petty sectarianism, and I cannot respect a group who, in my view, are not doing much to bridge the divide. You know, they may do some charity work here and there, but I just don't see the sort of messaging that they're putting out there as being anything positive. And frankly, I don't see what the hype around them is. I can't speak for their actual musical talent. I'm not a fan of rap. That's beside the point. Within that genre, they may be talented. I don't know, but um, the thing I take from this is at some point you cannot just go around saying whatever the hell you want and not expecting some pushback at a certain point. Free speech does not mean a free platform. It's the same argument basically for not allowing Donald Trump to speak in Parliament. Just because free speech is important doesn't mean that those who are stirring up hatred or violence, whether it be Donald Trump or Kneecap or anyone else from whatever ideological persuasion, it doesn't give them a green light to do that. When you are a public figure, and Kneecap are basically public figures, they're abusing that position by saying the sort of things that they're saying. It's no good saying, "Oh, we're against violence," whilst they're simultaneously basically promoting it. If they don't intend to promote any threats against parliamentarians, then why did they say it? They apologised. So do they accept that they've been reckless? But this is why I don't think they're sincere, because they're now doubling down and pushing even harder for their concerts to go ahead. If they were genuinely remorseful, they would show a little bit of humility and maybe reflect on some of the things that they're putting out there. This is not about them criticizing Israel or being pro Palestinian. If they were simply criticizing Israel, I'd have no problem with that, provided it was done in such a way that was criticizing policy as opposed to advocating any sort of anti Semitic tropes or pro Hamas slogans. I do think some of the pro Palestinian people have done themselves no favours by not differentiating between support for Hamas and support for the Palestinians. And I think Kneecap's no exception. But again, just saying it, Kneecap. I mean, who calls himself after a paramilitary punishment? It's just, at the very least, it's not exactly good PR. So I've no doubt they'll have their supporters, who will aggressively shout about free speech. Um, but what about the families of David Amos and Joe Cox? There has been real threats against MPs, and I just don't think they're part of the solution in terms of injustice regarding Israel and Palestine. I just think that they are promoting a sectarian image. You know, I just think they are part of an ideology that belongs in the past. Um, the same for their loyalist counterparts. If it was if it was three guys and one of them had the Union Jack on his face and he was calling for violence against nationalists, I would be saying exactly the same thing. I just think when you're a public figure, you have responsibility. So I appreciate not everyone's going to agree with me. They're going to use the free speech argument. I challenge you, okay? Free speech carries responsibility. I challenge you to explain how it's okay to stand up on a platform when you have thousands of people listening to you and advocate violence against someone else. It's irresponsible at the very least. So I've no sympathy for all these concerts being cancelled. Apparently, there's even counter-terrorism investigations going on. Well, you know what? I thought, what did they expect? Seriously, what did they expect when they've been promoting what they've been promoting for a long time now? At some point, it was going to catch up with them. You cannot get up on a platform, spew hatred, spew violence, and then spew calls for violence, and then not expect a response. And to do it in a country that they hate, it's pretty hypocritical. That's my view. I appreciate not everyone will agree, but if you're supporting Kneecap, I challenge you to justify the advocacy of violence. And if you're going to deny it, explain to me why they've apologised. If they never said it, or it was taken out of context, why would they apologise? What they would do if it was taken out of context to say, we don't apologize because we did not do that. However, we regret that it was misunderstood or something like that. They actually apologized. I think the only reason they did was self-interest because they want to keep their concerts. They don't want to be, lose their concert revenue, the royalties that they'll get from that. I just don't see the hype around these guys, and I think um, you know, I see nothing convincing about them being anything productive or progressive. Simply saying that they care about the Palestinians isn't enough if they're simultaneously representing what they're representing, which is sectarianism. Um, That's how I see it. And by the way, coming from a Northern Ireland Protestant background, I have absolutely no time for loyalist street thugs who, beat up a random Catholic. It's disgusting and it belongs in the past. I have no time for those loyalist marching bands that sing anti-Catholic slogans on the day of the Pontiff's death. I think that is deeply disrespectful and boneheaded. So no one can accuse me of being biased in this regard.